Three ball from CG43. They're in front.
This is flat out ridiculous.
From a beautiful left hand, in and out finish, the old-fashioned way.
Newell gets to the basket with one to come. From there again. You have got to be kidding me. Tyson step, wraps it up.
Hi everyone, NBL Pocket Podcast coming at you. New recording setup, so I really don't know if things sound good or not, so hopefully everything works out well. We haven't been recording in a long time, but there's been enough happening in the league that now's the time to warrant a recording. What are we going to be talking about today? A whole bunch of stuff. Melbourne United, the league in general. There's been a lot of talk about the NIL and the NBA Europe and a few other things, so I'm going to talk about how that affects the league in a very short conversation. I'm going to be talking about Cotton, Gaze and Loggins, who's the better player of the three of them. A whole bunch of stuff. Let's start from the top. Chris Goulding and Melbourne United. Let's start there. Chris Goulding had a great game against Cairns in a 1-point loss, which a game they definitely should have won. I think it was even at home. So the overarching subject of this is, are Melbourne United concerned? And if they're not, should they be? Subheading under that is Chris Goulding. In the wins he plays well, and in the losses he plays poorly. But I don't think that's a marker of their success. I just think that's sort of like a fatuous stat. Like, when the team plays poorly, he also plays poorly. So the big question I have regarding Goulding and Melbourne United is, are his ups and downs due to a strategic failure or just straight up father time? And it's a bit of both. For the last couple of years, he's had soft tissue injuries, which are the hallmark of an aging player. But then he comes out and scores 30 points against Cairns, so he's still got it. He's still... The main thing and effectiveness of his game, as I see it, is his gravity, and he still commands a lot of attention. And if left open, he will shoot, and he will make most of the time. So his in-between game has dropped off. I meant to actually look at free throw attempts this season as opposed to years past, but he gets fouled a lot on outside shots, so that's really no indication of whether he's attacking the rim. But I do think there's a drop-off in his in-between game. It's either catch and shoot threes or open layups. There's not a lot of anything off the dribble, but then again, there never really has been to any elite level, so he's still an effective player. Looking at Melbourne United more broadly, they won their first 9. The sort of fool's gold of that was that they only beat 3 teams that are now playing above 500, and all three of them were playing rather poorly at the time. Adelaide, not so much, they were quite good, but Sydney were very poor at that time, and SCM, South East Melbourne, were still finding themselves. So they were the only 3 above 500 teams at present that they beat in that 9-game stretch. The first 5 of those games, not first 5, but just 5 of those 9 games were at home. So that's like Melbourne United's little pat on the head from the league, pat on the bum and head from the league, where it's a bit of a soft landing to start the year. I'm not hugely concerned about Melbourne United for simple reasons. The only thing I'm concerned about is the Ili injury. And the bench is average. Once you kind of, and not to put them down, but I looked at the box score of Cairns and you just looked at the bench and no one did anything, and you look at some of those names and, capable players. Krislovic came off the bench that game and he's quite good. Impactful, not a huge volume player, but certainly can give you 20 to 30 good NBL minutes and has had big statting games this season. But I don't see a lot of names that would play a lot of minutes elsewhere. And that's kind of across the league, actually. Bench production's down a bit. But anyway, so the bench has got some odd names on it. And with Ili out, they've had to kind of search for a player. And I know they've got their import Walker running the show at point guard, but still, they've dropped off defensively. They're 2-7 in their last 9. But again, some of those games have been at Perth, at South East Melbourne, at Adelaide and versus Sydney. And they all came within a 10-day stretch, that 4-game losing streak. I think it was in that order, or maybe there was someone in between there. But anyway, they dropped 4 in a row, I think. And they were all within 10 days, December 4th to December 14th. So I think had a soft start to the year and then got whacked on the nose with a difficult schedule at the same time as Golding kind of injured / recovering, Ili / out. So they were just sort of had a few balls up in the air and it didn't quite work out for them. I'd say the only things, looking at the statistics, the only things that are worries are they're 7th in 3-point percentage. So not first in the league, not second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way down to 7th. And, they're only above the easy beats like Brisbane and Cairns and someone else. Or maybe Cairns is above them. I can't remember who was below them. But so they're 7th in 3-point percentage, 5th in assists per game, which is always kind of low for them. They're normally a team that moves the ball a lot. But then they're 4th in turnovers per game. So, they're lower in assists. You want your assist turnover ratio pretty good. And theirs is, I guess, adequate, but I don't know, just was shocked to see them that high in turnovers. Teams are scoring against them, and maybe that's why. As in when I say 4th in turnovers, like 4th highest in turnovers. And obviously the teams that are rubbish are above them. Forecasting Melbourne, I'm reminded of the story of the bear, which is like 2 kids are in the woods and they come across a bear. And one of the boys just freezes in fear. And whereas the other starts slowly reaching down and tying up his shoelaces. And the boy who was frozen goes, "Are you crazy? Don't move, you can't outrun the bear. You're not going to outrun the bear." And the kid who's tying his shoelaces says, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you." And I think that's where Melbourne's at this year. So you got to look at, they're not the most perfect team this season, but are they better than the competition? And I think they're right there, especially with Ili in the lineup. If he returns, big if. But I look at the rest of their games. They've got 9 left. And have I calculated this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe they've only got 7 games left. Fuck, I wrote this down, Paul. I wrote this down wrong. But anyway, in their next couple, they've got at Sydney, Tasmania, Brisbane at home, at Perth, at New Zealand, Adelaide, Cairns. They must have more games. I must have misread this. Anyway, they've got those games. And I look at that and go, they're going to finish with I've got here a 19-12 record. I've kind of fucked up here because I think there's more games in the season than that. But I look at their schedule and I think, they're going to win, they're going to have that winning kind of record around the sort of high teens and low teens win mark, and they're going to be in the top 3, which is right where they want to be. And I actually like the fact they've kind of slumped at this time of the year. So the problem will be if they don't come good in a couple of weeks, but I have every anticipation that they do. The other thing I'd say is Damon Lowry predicted this team wouldn't lose until the new year, I think. And the 3 words I'd say for Damon are strength of schedule. The NBL's really hard to follow this year because the stat man's out and the stats are absolutely everywhere. I tried to go back for this pod and look at Cotton versus Gaze versus Loggins, and stats are just all over the internet in some crazy places on some funky websites where you're getting, in between articles, you're getting peppered with ads about how to cure sleep apnea with an ancient Chinese secret, women in Ukraine that could be folded in half and come in your mailbox. The NBL is really tough for an analyst of any degree to follow, especially this year. Moving on, let's talk about something else. I had this question coming up, and it was one for Canyon, so I'm going to ask it to you, and you put on your Can Man hat. And by the way, Canyon had a very busy schedule. He'll be back in the near future, I'm sure, but I thought I'd just get something on record. But I was going to ask, and this just kind of harps into a question about big men, but also Perth. And I was like, who is the best big in NBL 26? And I know the first answer is probably McGee. But here are the contenders. JaVale McGee of Illawarra, Harrelson of Brisbane, who just got hurt, JLA, Menenga, Humphreys, Doolittle, Cooks, Edwards, and Magnay kind of rounds out the list. I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4. I think Cooks is the best big in the NBL. Just his ability to switch 1 through 5. There's no one he can't guard. The lack of free throw shooting drives me mental, but he's got great activity in that. And he's won, but not by a huge stretch. Second best big in the league, I've honestly got Doolittle. People are probably pulling their hair out saying McGee, but I'm not so sure. Like Doolittle, on his day, the inconsistency's been bad for him. He's been up and down, but I actually think that's a system error rather than his. He can do everything, and he's the strongest guy in the NBL, other than Lupepa, who's injured. This guy's massive. And then the third one, I've got McGee, and then fourth, I've got JLA. And really, that's why I said this is kind of a question about Perth. I'm like, if you break down the league, I think Perth have the best front court in the NBL. And that's why I had a couple of back and forths on Twitter, which were really respectful and fun chats about the Wildcats. And I'm just like, this team is good. That front line of JLA and Doolittle is massive. And the Wildcats, whenever they play teams, look big. And the answer to that question sort of puts that in focus. So if you're playing at home, have your own little think about this. And then following on from the big man conversation, JaVale McGee, he's averaging 22 points, 10 rebounds, 2 blocks. Can't deny the statistical output. Illawarra are 8 and 13. Now, they've had injuries, they've had problems. They're not the same roster from last year. But the question I was going to pose to Canyon, and that I now pose to everyone else there listening, is McGee's production but lack of team success a condemnation of the Hawks? Or is it a referendum on the winning efficiency of bigs in the NBL? I mean, and what I mean by that is McGee's had a big year, statted great, and the Hawks at the time I wrote this down were 8 and 13. Looks like they're going to sort of just bumble out of the plane. I don't think they're going to catch up to Tasmania. So, yeah, and I just look at, Trey Kell was the player they had last year. And Frolling's been a huge loss. They had to go out and find a big to replace him. But I don't know, I just keep asking this question of like, do you really want a big 7-footer? Does that limit what you can do defensively? And is the spend so great that then you just give up any wing depth, which they've lost? Their guard and wing rotation's really lowered. But Trey Kell was not a big name like McGee, but seemed to drive pretty good results for them. I don't know if that's very fair to McGee, but I just wanted to pose the question. Following on, staying in the front court, staying with the big men, I was thinking about this. Who's the best 7-footer of the NBL Pocket Pod generation? For people who don't know, this podcast has been running for about 7 years, 7 seasons or so. And in that time, like legit 7-footers, the league has seen McGee, JLA, Bogut, Colton Iverson of the New Zealand Breakers, if you remember him, Kai Soto of the Philippines, Joe Chi from China, and now Jesse Edwards of Melbourne, who I think scrapes in at 7 feet tall. And I asked the question, I might pose an answer, but I might just pose it out to people listening. Who is the best legit 7-footer of the NBL Pocket Pod generation the last 7 years? I honestly think if I could pick any one of those guys as they presented to an NBA season, obviously Bogut is the best player of the lot there, but when he presented to the NBL, was he the most impactful? I honestly think the answer's McGee or JLA, and Bogut's not far off either. But Bogut, that second or third year, was pretty busted up. I'm going to say JLA just does so much. Amazingly, I think it's Joe Luala-Chul. Think about it and get back to me at Twitter at NBL Pocket Pod or Gmail or emails if people still use those, nblpocketpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, Cotton's having a great year. Let's talk about Bryce Cotton. And it's been a running joke all year with Wildcat fans and just the league in general of like no regrets and how good Cotton's been. And Cotton leaving the Wildcats is devastating for Perth and Western Australia. Devastating. There is regrets. There has to be, especially the way their imports have panned out with Jones and now Duke hurt. And presumably the spend's been pretty high anyway. And looking at what Cotton has done in Adelaide, and not so much the scoring. The scoring's obviously dropped off. Last year with Perth, he scored like crazy. He had the 60-point game and was putting massive numbers up, clearly, obviously, at the end of a contract. But he's been better this year in Adelaide. Laser-focused. Who on that Adelaide team has regressed? No one. Everyone stepped up their game. Rakocevic I really like. He wasn't there last year, but Humphreys stepped up his game. Flynn Cameron wasn't at Adelaide last year, but was in the league last year and was a bit of a no-name player. He's taken a huge step forward. Is it correlation or causation? I leave that to you, the public, to work out. But I don't think, there's no such thing as a coincidence, or very seldom. And, Vasiljevic has been patchy, but still pretty good and better than he was last year. Last year he just jacked up shots and some went down, some didn't. There wasn't, and he's now hitting these big shots and a part of things. Isaac White looks a bit better. So all these players, no one's regressed playing with Cotton. And, And then looking at it more historically, the knock on Cotton was always that he played with the Wildcats, who always had a stacked deck, spent a lot of money. Bendat was just an open book I think he was 155 million years old and didn't really care about spend, and was quite obvious about that and kind of flaunted his money and just said, like, we will buy who we need to buy and we'll crush it. And was like that in his communications with the league and people around it. So that was always the knock on Cotton, that, yeah, like, well done, you play well and win for the winningest club and the highest payroll club. Then he kind of did it when the club wasn't like that, and now he's doing it in Adelaide, which, you know, a team that has spent a fair bit, but, you know, he's just, success is following this guy wherever he goes. So the experiment's been fun. And, you know, last year Adelaide were good without being great. I think they were a playing team. And their team was, you know, arguably the supporting cast around KD, who I feel bad to Davis to compare him to Cotton. There's a 5-year age gap. They're just different players, but nonetheless I'm going to do it. The supporting cast last year was Detch, Humphreys, who's returned, Harold Vasiljevic, Jarrell Martin was on that team, Lat Mayan and KD. This year it's Cameron, Humphreys, Vasiljevic, Rakocevic, Cheatham, and Isaac White and a few others. Arguably that last year's team, if they're healthy, Jarrell Martin was a bit beat up, but that's a better supporting cast than this year, and Cotton's taken them to the very, very top. And he's doing stuff that it's not just the scoring. I mean, and that's where I've just lost all faith in scouts, because I remember watching something on ESPN or Fox, and this scout was talking about some kid in college who was going to go to the NBA. And I remember he kind of hit record on it and then stepped back, and you could see that he was wearing a suit jacket and tie, but was wearing shorts or different coloured pants or maybe in a pair of jeans. And he just looked like the biggest fucking nerd. And I thought, I you know, good on him, and I hope he makes his money and all that sort of shit. But I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? And what would he know about? What would he really know? And doing it from his mother's basement. I just thought, scouts are full of shit, and half of them work for an agent, and they're just sort of like a hopeless mouthpiece, and they don't feel the league. And I'm not saying I do. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not just saying you ignore stats and you ignore a few things, but some of these scouts, man, jeepers creepers. And they think some players good and some players not. It's just like, yeah, right. And I look at what Cotton did in college, where we know about the scoring, but go back and look at the assist numbers at Providence and how that team was nothing, and then he got them into this massive tournament and kind of won. I'm not a big college watcher, who could be, but just seemed to have a full round game. And I think now, looking back, you think about who he played with in Perth, with the likes of Nick Kay and Plumlee and all that, and how well those guys kind of played. This is a special player, not just in the scoring, which obviously is the crux of it all. I want to talk about Cotton's case for the NBL greatest. And I remember Cotton did this podcast, we had a chat about stuff, and I think off air, which I probably should keep private, but I'm not going to. I just sort of said, like, oh, you know, like, Gaze has got a lot of credentials, like, what's your hope? Do you want to eclipse him? And he was like, well, you know, it'd be nice. Which I don't think, speaking out of school, saying that. But there was a trepidation about bringing up the name Andrew Gaze. Very sacred name, very good player. But really, I think NBL greatest comes down to 3 players. And before I launch into this conversation, I will say, I haven't watched all these guys play. I speak to people, whatever. I'm not going to pretend to be anything more. I'm just going to look at it from my tiny keyhole lens on the league and where it's at and who I've spoken to. And there's much more qualified people to talk to about this. And also, I actually hate these kind of conversations about the case for the greatest. I think they're lame, but, you know, you got to do something with your days. So really, there's a conversation of 3, and I want to marry up, you know, skill of like how good they actually were as a player, and then also some sort of accomplishment. There's guys who played for a long time, put up huge stats over a long period of time. That's important, that's great. But I'm also looking at what player, if, you know, the fate of the world relied on this player winning and this team winning, what player would you put on that team? And for that reason, it comes down to 3 players, Gaze, Loggins and Cotton. They each have the game to substantiate any fall in the numbers, and then obviously their historical numbers and achievements are high. So the case for Gaze is, it's a marriage between aptitude and accomplishment, is the way to put a button on that. The case for Gaze is obvious, 7 MVPs. I've spoken to a couple of coaches in the NBL who played at the time and sort of are willing to engage on the debate whether he was the worst defensive player in NBL history. I can't comment to that, but they certainly did. Won the 2 titles, played a bunch of seasons. The knock on his career is not the most winningest player. 6 losing seasons, and his win total is 314 wins to 283 losses. And you look at where Melbourne kind of sat on the table with him as a player, and they had some really big years where they obviously won, but never, I don't think, ever finished top of the league, or maybe did once in the early 2000s, but most of the time kind of finished middle table. And I guess the knock on Gazer's game, and there's not many, because he was, some of the stats are incredible. Most of his great statistical seasons came when, his teams won 5 games and lost 20 and shit like that. But the knock on his game, I guess, as opposed to Cotton, is Cotton's more of a game breaker, got more of a bag one-on-one. And the game was very different when Gaze plays, I'm not denying that, but Gaze was an accumulator, right? You could almost, with a scythe, with a what do you call it, those jeweler's eyepiece, you could break down where he was going to get his 25 to 30 points. 8 points off backdoor cuts, couple of threes, couple of jumpers, free throws, and he's there. And he had big making shots. I don't want to put the guy down. But Cotton, and this is my little lens, and you can come at me at Twitter at NBL Pocket Pod, Cotton just has the ability to destroy a defender in the first minute and in the final minute. And I just think that's really valuable and can go on a flourish and break games. Both players could. I just think Cotton's better. From my perspective, I caught Gazer's career kind of late, sort of mid-90s to his 2000s, so the end of his career. I haven't followed it all the way through like Cotton's. Leroy Loggins, well before my time, so I'm going to be steer clear here. But win record was pretty good. 317 wins to 220 losses. The league went through him forever. The guy to speak to about this is Body. Body thinks he's the best. Total 5 tools guy, 6'6", long arms, so got the bigger body over Gaze and obviously Cotton by a long way. 3 MVPs, Defensive Player of the Year, which is where neither Cotton or Gaze sit on that list. And that's an important thing, defense obviously. Played 20 seasons, 3 times champion, did only have 3 losing seasons, and both of those came late in his career when he was probably kind of busted up. And one came early on when I think he just finished 1 game below 500, so it was always a winning player. And then obviously played in a pretty stacked league where Gaze is banging around, so it's hard to get an MVP and things like that. So, and also his father wasn't the coach. It helps. Gaze's campaign helps that his father was the coach of both his national team and the club team. That's pretty handy, let me tell you. Let's make the case for Cotton. 173 wins, 105. The league is very different. Less teams, less games, less minutes. 5 times MVP, 3 times champion. We've heard all this stuff, but the case for me has moved clubs and has been just as effective and done different things with his game. So for me, I don't declare a winner. Who gives a shit? You can't really declare a winner anyway. But for me, Cotton's case is incredibly strong. Moving on. What have I got on my notepad here? I was going to ask Kenyon this question. Does Ian Clark move the needle for you in Southeast Melbourne? I didn't think Clark was good without being great at United last year. Is he what they need? Kind of. There's a lot of hero ball from Sobey. I'm just going to leave that up as a question. I'm not going to give my answer. Okay, now we're talking more about the state of the league, and we're approaching 23 minutes, so apologies for running a bit long, but the question I had here is, are the Brisbane Bullets the NBL basketball's version of Springtime for Hitler in the producers? Now, I wrote this question at a time when they hadn't signed their newest import, Maldonado, who actually played pretty well the other day, I think in a loss. Maybe it was a win. Who gives a shit? Their season's well and truly over. It was actually over before it began. But what I mean by that is, if you've seen the producers, one of the producers, Max Bialystock, realizes that you can make more money with a bomb than you can with a hit on Broadway. And so they go out to design to make this horrible play called Springtime for Hitler, and unfortunately it turns into a hit, but because they banked on it being a flop, it didn't make money as a hit. So they kind of bet against themselves. And that's why I've asked the question about the Bullets. I mean, their campaign was just so riddled from the start with a lame duck coach and imports that were kind of awash in the league. Yeah, I asked that question. If you keep the team spend below the floor, so the way it works in the NBL is you have a minimum spend to then, if you make that curtain or apron or cutoff, then you get a percentage of the luxury tax from teams that spend over the salary cap. And my understanding is the salary cap's sort of around the $1.5 million mark or something like that. And if individual players like JLA are getting $1 million, well, a lot of teams are probably over it. And by a lot of teams, you're probably looking at, Melbourne probably, and Adelaide, and Sydney presumably, and a few other teams. So is there money to be made by being a crap team like Brisbane, not paying players but making the salary floor, selling a few tickets but not many, but recouping the money in the luxury tax? And if you're an owner of a team and you know that teams are way overspending, maybe you're like, you know what, this is the year to tank in a strange way, even though there's no draft picks involved, tank and just get that money. No, I don't know. In the NBL's, everything's done behind closed doors. It's all the rules are written on the back of inside of a grease-stained pizza box. Even the owners don't know what's going on and are begging for transparency. 7 of the 10 of them anyway. So I certainly don't know what's going on. And sometimes the NBL has quite a disregard for its fans, and it's hard to know what the fuck to think or do. Sorry for the language. But that's just a fun little... me and Canyon had a lot of fun with that, and I hope you do it too at home. Looking at what else is here. Oh, yeah. NIL and NBA Europe. Trying to make sense of this. And then the Japanese League, which I forgot to get a budget cost for. But anyway, I think the last 2 years especially, we've seen where the Japanese B League has come along and taken a lot of the NBL's good talent, especially the Aussie-based guys. Nick Kay took Cooks for a season, if I'm not mistaken. A few others. Can't think of them off the top of my head. And I wonder what their budgets are. I'm sure if you Google it, Japanese B League roster budget, you'll get some sort of measure. But now we've got, obviously, EuroLeague's always been an issue, has taken good players. NBA, obviously. NBA, EuroLeague, take good players. But now you've got this college thing come up, and it's looking like college budgets are going to be $2 to $10 million US, which is like $20 million bucks, which is bigger than the spend of NBL clubs. Now, luckily there's an age restriction, but geez, I just look at the NBL and think, how on earth are they going to lure back talent under 22, 23? And there's a number of pretty good players in the NBL who qualify under that age bracket. So I worry about the league in that regard. I worry about the league at the top and bottom, where it's going to struggle to keep young talent, because I think that kid from New South Wales who signed with Pitt got like $600,000 American and a hotel and a accommodation paid for. So let's say that's $100,000 a year. So he's got $700,000 US. Oh, and they took the girlfriend over. $700,000 US. That's JLA money. And he's playing in college and getting that full exposure. And the big thing about the Next Stars program, this is probably the biggest fallacy or lie that program ever put out. I loved it when they were like, oh, it's great for kids to come in and learn from a fully grown league. That was such bullshit. That is such a lie, because, you're going to learn so much parking it on the pine, not playing and just training. Give me a break. You're so much better to go to... people your own age, a bit of a challenge, but where you're asked to do different things, work on your deficiencies rather than just sitting on the bench during games. And ask the kid in Perth how much fun and how much development he's getting. It was always a fallacy. I never understood it. It was a good line. You'd have like old heads from the NBL world being like, no, you get to learn from Bogut or whatever. It's like, Bogut is, and I'm not, players of a mature age are going to training hard, and then they're going home to their children and their home and getting their money and moving the fuck on. They're not developing their left hand. They're not, well, they probably are, but you're better off in games under pressure learning how to play. So I never understood that. So the Next Stars program, you would think, folds up, which always it was going to be. The Next Stars program may as well have been called the Josh Giddey pathway or / the LaMelo Ball cash in. And it served its purpose. I think it's time to sort of lovingly retire it, send it to a hardwood grave. But maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, so college budgets are $2 to $10 million. But you know what college is like. Payments under the table, it's probably more like $500 million. NBA Europe, no roster budgets have been given out for that yet. I believe the league's going to start next season, or next year or the year after. But EuroLeague and Euro Cup budgets are typically around the sort of 20 to 40 million euro mark, which is euros, so you double it for Australian dollars. So already you're competing with that. Japanese budgets are what they are. I just think, wow, it's going to be really hard to lure people to Australia with the money. The lifestyle's great, but the money's what most people are chasing. And and we've seen a drop-off in the import quality. There's no doubt about it. To go through every team, and by the time you get to that second and third import, they're struggling to crack rotations. And that's a result of just what's happening at present, and it's set to get worse. So I have my concerns for the NBL. And the reason why, and this is the last thing I'll leave you with, we're approaching the 30-minute mark, is because the NBA is silently kind of declared war on all international leagues by starting its own international league. And the NBL has done such work in aligning itself with the NBA. I feel like a little bitch, okay, I'll use the term. It's become a little bitch, which is a great strategy. I actually agree with it. There's a whole bunch of NBA fans in Australia. If you can get 10-20% of them, you've already increased the league a lot. So it's a good strategy. But the problem now is you've got an unfair teammate. You've got a turncoat in the NBA who are going to be leeching all your good players, which is why anyone really goes to the game. We don't care about anything else. We just want to see really good players play. And the NBL and its marketing has always been like, well, the second best league, NBA, da-da-da. But I actually think that for it going forward, for it to be sustainable, for it to be a rough and tumble product, it has to show where it has a differentiation in the market. And what I mean by that is the NBA, like the defense is a joke and the rules are a bit of a joke. If the NBL came out with its marketing saying, hey, watch the NBL, guys actually play defense, it's really tough, guys actually fight each other, they're not just counting their money, which is both a slightly fair and unfair accusation at the NBA. Yeah, it's a tough league, plays defense, and if you could splice together like guys traveling in the NBL and guys traveling in the NBA and all the violations they're allowed to get away with, and then like the much more decent footwork in the NBL, and create that, I think you have to have that conversation for the league to actually thrive with a way reduced payroll internationally. They're never going to do that. It's too combative. But I actually think something like that, if you did it in good taste. And the thing I'd point to of the past, and this is a long time ago in the 80s, the Pepsi Coke challenge, where they put 3 glasses of black sugary water in front of people and said, which one do you like the best? And they often chose the Pepsi. And then Coke just freaked out and did something else. And that was Pepsi, the distant second in the market, really throwing a loop at the big boy. And I think the NBL, if it's serious about its, I wouldn't say survival, it'll always be around, but if it's serious about its quote-unquote continued growth, you have to take a few wild swings and you can't just keep getting stamped on by the NBA. But then again, how this league makes money and sustains itself, between league and club, I've never understood, and neither of the owners, as we've discussed. Guys, that's all I've got for this week. That's all. There's a lot going on in the NBL. I can't wait for the finals, actually. I think they're going to be really exciting. There is so little between Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne, and Southeast Melbourne are making a push. Whew, Nathan Sober just plays so fucking hard. He's fearless. Like, some of the shots he takes are just outrageous. There's no conscience. But gee, they're fun. And then I think Perth, with that front line and their size, like Pepper's big, and anything can happen with them. So they're the teams I like the look of. Everyone else I think is a bit down in the dumps. Tasmania, I'm very disappointed in. I thought they were going to be much better. And then the bottom teams. Oh, here I go. I'm about to sign off, but I will do the last topic I had. I've seen it in my notebook. So all this talk about expansion into Canberra and Gold Coast and a few other places, Newcastle, so on and so forth. But putting aside what we spoke about before, the Asia leagues with a big payroll and NBA Europe in 2027, is expansion a farce, a joke, a fantasy when there's 5 teams well under 500? Cairns, Brisbane, Illawarra, New Zealand Breakers, and Tasmania under 500, and 2 who are beyond a joke. I mean, Cairns and Brisbane. I wrote this before Cairns won that game against Melbourne, but there's no reason why all 8 or 9 teams should be around the 500 mark, and every game is just a complete whodunit. Who knows what's going to happen? The NBL schedule for a while there, until this Cairns upset, was just, it had a lot of dead spots and divots in the fairway. And I wonder if that's a result. It's just a result of the spend. Who are we kidding? There's not the talent to maintain 10 teams. I'm going to be brutal. Australian guys are going internationally and the imports aren't as good. So what do you think is going to happen? And then the structure of the teams. I saw a reel a little while ago of Jason Kadee just being like, culture's the most overused word in sports. And that hit me like a cool breeze. It was so refreshing to hear a player who's played so long say, oh, that's absolutely true, where culture is, do the checks come on time? Are the conditions good? Is the coach competent? And there's certain NBL clubs that haven't lived up to that responsibility. Guys, that's NBL Pocket Podcast for this week. Bringing it in at 35 minutes, 5 minutes over. Who cares? Follow the show on Twitter is where I'm most active, at NBL Pocket Pod. NBL Pocket Podcast @gmail.com. Give the show a rating and review and all that sort of stuff. And if you're into it, tell your friends. Thanks very much. See you at the games. Bye.